Hello, listeners, and thank you for tuning in to part 2 of our long-awaited politics episode featuring Yung Chomsky, menswear enthusiast, and the producer of TrueAnon. Last episode, we spoke with Yung C about how his interest in menswear developed, the reactions he gets from his audience online, and his personal philosophy when it comes to getting dressed. This week, however, we are getting deeper into our main topic. We're getting deeper in the paint. We're going to be talking about labor issues, PR, and the utility of looking cool when you're part of a political movement. I thought it was a really great episode, a really fun discussion. So I don't want to keep you any longer, so let's just get into it. Here is the episode.
Let's get into that's a good segue into the actual topic of today's episode.
The big topic. I love a good segue. I was just riding on a good segue down this Market
I saw
Street.
Job on it.
Yeah.
Drove right off a cliff. Yeah. That's how the co-founder of Segway died, which is pretty funny.
We talked about that on our podcast.
Oh, okay. Synergy.
Yeah.
Brand synergy.
Yeah, but so we had you on to because again, you kind of at an interesting intersection, which is left-wing politics,
art,
and
technology, culture.
Exactly. Science, technology, engineering, and mathematics.
Yeah.
No, but yeah, menswear and left-wing politics, which again, you don't really never the two shall meet usually. But in your case, they do meet all the time.
Every day.
That's right. So if we get into the bigger overall topic in here, you kind of talked about the aesthetics and politics. Maybe we could dive more into that because the left. So full disclosure, because this is probably the second part of the podcast. We did record this. We attempted to record this earlier, but then we had some audio issues, so we're doing it again. And
this is round 2, baby.
Lost.
Equipment malfunction.
Yes.
We had interference from potential state or non-state actors. Exactly. We're still going to be doing a full forensic investigation to determine.
They didn't want this episode to be released.
No. Yeah.
I did just watch the episode of Veep where Selena tweets about her boyfriend and her political opponent, but she does it openly and then she blames it on the Chinese, which is crazy.
That's a pretty safe tactic in this.
It's I wouldn't be surprised if that actually. I'm sure it does happen.
Yeah,
it actually does happen. But something we talked about the last time was how again we're generalizing here. We don't mean it in any kind of ill will, but the left doesn't really have, at least the current left doesn't have a cohesive look to them, while the right has been trying to capture that kind of.
And it's again, it makes sense why that is not the case, because chances are, if you are any kind of I'm going to say that again, left wing radical in the United States, things are probably not going great for you. And that's how you reached the conclusions that you came to politically. So again, it makes sense that there's a lot of people on the left who can't afford to be into clothes at the same time.
Or it's kind of sometimes it's not really something you don't really think about, right? It's if you're in a spot where you don't have the money or you don't have the time to do it, you don't really think, is this trouser the right rise, or even in streetwear, right? It's kind of a catch-all for the left, but then the right, again, we're looking just kind of back over the Tiki Torch stuff, and especially Jordan Peterson, which if you watch our stream, that we do not like Jordan Peterson at all. But he's a great example of a guy who, if you read his little feature, I think in the New York Times, something like that, someone said that he went from wearing kind of schlumpy suits to he went through an image consultant or something where he starts wearing these
double-breasted vests and stuff.
And he even said that he's trying to dress quote old school. and approach it that way, so people can tie into his conservative, even though he doesn't call it that, his conservative right wing politics with like a new, like they repackage something that people can get into now and be like, oh yeah, that's logical, and and look at him, he's a professional guy, right? And especially now with the Hawaiian shirt stuff too, right? That's kind of like a thing there.
That's been up a lot recently. There's this weird right-wing militia, the Boogaloo Boys, who kind of adopted Aloha shirts, and now all of a sudden you see like people on Twitter, you see the New York Times saying it's like, okay, well you gotta get rid of these, like no one can wear them anymore, they've been tainted, which I mean, we don't think that's the right way to approach a lot of things.
Yeah,
but
there's a lot of stuff in there. So why don't we start with like this aesthetics?
Again, I think the Boogaloo thing with the Aloha shirt calls back to what we were talking about, and in the prior part where it's like saying that layering shirts is like Steve Bannon or something. Maybe it feels that way if you're not used to seeing Aloha shirts. But to me, wearing Aloha shirts is like very normal, or I think probably to people who live in the Pacific Islands, of course, which is people who I saw really pushing against this. So the idea that now some guys with guns like own that image is completely absurd.
After like 3 weeks of people knowing about them,
right?
Like it's just like, okay,
right. But people have this weird knee-jerk thing where they're like, again, because their perspective, they don't have a strong association with that, so they're like, oh, now this is imprinted so strongly on me, like, oh, you're Steve Bannon, or like, you're a Boogaloo guy who's wearing that. It's like, no, I'm not. This is just a look. Or again, I'm kind of in dialogue with something much older than this thing that you're talking about. And I also wanted to echo, I think, Spencer, your point is very well made about the idea that the left is not cohesive or not fashionable in general. I don't want to seem like we're being too harsh or too critical. I think it's kind of a microcosm of the structural barriers or difficulties of the left movement, such as it is in general, right? Where the right-wing conservative movements have institutional support. They will get funding from billionaire donors. For example, something that comes to mind is like Turning Point USA, aka Toilet Paper USA. That's an organization where they are meant to be on college campuses and represent, conservative thought on college campuses. And it's like, this is the new generation of kids who are actually hearkening back to, right-wing libertarian values. But it's totally astroturfed. They get funded by people like the Kochs, and they are getting millions and millions of dollars. There is no institution that is putting money like that into left-wing organizations, because...
Unless you count George Soros.
Yeah, well, so you're kidding, but, I mean, George Soros is a billionaire who funds, Democratic Party and kind of socially liberal causes, and then has become this kind of boogeyman for the right, and also ties into these anti-Semitic conspiracies because he is Jewish. But there are literally nobody who's a billionaire, because the mission of when we use the term the left, we are not talking about the Democratic Party or
of course,
liberals. We are talking about socialists, communists, anarchists, people who want to expropriate the wealth of somebody like a George Soros or like the Kochs or anyone who's a billionaire, and redistribute it. So they're never going to have that support. And so that is true whether you are a media organization, you're somebody who's trying to do a Patreon. If you're lucky like me, you can find enough of an audience, subscribers that can keep you afloat, but we're still very much small potatoes.
Right.
Okay, so having said all that, we were trying to talk about aesthetics and...
I guess in the left and the left and stuff.
Yeah, well, I think... Sorry, go ahead, Ethan.
Well, I was going to say, like, when I think of, like, the left, or, like, the memes of the left, it's always very, we want to call it the dyed hair, kind of like punk, but, like, not really, kind of like the nerdier punk kind of aesthetics to it, I mean, again, punks, they're left-wing, at least in the past and whatever, but then when you compare that to, to say the right, they always try and portray themselves as, like, something that's kind of got this well, like you said, it's establishment stuff, right? And you look presentable. They love authority, so of course wearing a suit is kind of like a symbol of that.
And yeah, I mean, it's like there are many like right wing groups that have kind of like uniform, like the Proud Boys with their like Fred Perry, not Fred Perry, is it Fred Perry?
Yes.
I think so.
Fred Perry polos and khakis and shit like that. But I mean, yeah, there's nothing that there's no like cohesive look. On the left.
Yeah.
And I was also going to think too of like, I mean, the left technically, or at least to me, it's very inclusive, right? You got a bunch of people from a variety of different backgrounds where, it's kind of, it's nice to see that there isn't something like that, because it shows that anyone.
No, I mean, I'm not saying that I think that everyone should have like a
no, of course not.
Or
Yeah. Yeah. But I'm just saying, like, it's just interesting to think about, how technically to some
and
of
that's
these
what
people,
this podcast is. It's just a list of things that are interesting to think about.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think it is. Yeah, you do come up against some interesting tensions, right, between the idea of creating a cohesive movement, which I think cohesion and discipline are good things, which. Again, it's almost kind of silly to talk about the left as though it's some kind of like it's a thing, because I think at this point in history, especially, it's very much. I don't know. I don't want to be so negative and pessimistic, but
like, in the United States, like what we talk about as the left is not really like a left movement.
Yeah, there hardly is one, right? I mean, the DSA is the largest socialist organization in the country and has 70,000 members, but it's very heterogeneous even among the DSA. It's not, I mean, it won some power in recent elections in terms of getting members into various offices, but still, we don't have a left party in this country like other countries do that have parliamentary democracies. We don't have a labor movement is the biggest thing. The labor movement in this country has just been absolutely decimated via decades of concerted effort by extremely powerful and wealthy people who were able to do it via laws, and that's kind of a whole other discussion for a different podcast. But that being said, discipline and cohesiveness and all those things are good values for a movement to have. But on the other hand, inclusiveness and openness are also kind of left values, and those sometimes can come into tension in certain ways. If you're like, okay, well, everybody should dress like this, or should kind of be able to march together or something, and then you get people who either don't want to or can't, and you want to include everyone, which the spirit of that is good. So I don't know. It's kind of very abstract at this point, but obviously if you are like a kind of racist, fascist organization that can just say, we essentially want everybody to look like this, and you just exclude everyone who doesn't, you can be super cohesive in your appearance and behavior. But yeah, I do think that those kind of things obviously help an organization in some ways achieve effectiveness if you can create a kind of group identity, and you create some cohesion within an organization.
Well, because I mean, it's like you could look at the current protest movement, which by all means is not over or anything like that, but you look at, like, I don't know, I kind of wish that there was a larger organization that all this energy can go into. I wish there
absolutely.
And I mean, that's, we talk with something like this, where it is like it's a mass movement of people in the streets. I personally think, not maybe a uniform, but if there was some kind of aesthetic, I think it would help. It helps build a group identity. It helps build solidarity amongst people who maybe haven't really thought about it before.
Yeah, or a calling card, a slogan, a symbol. I mean, I'll tell you what, it's really been cool to see the eye emoji catch on. So that became, that's from TrueAnon. I mean, Brace kind of started that a little while ago. And we talked about this on one of our episodes. People are like, what does the eye mean? But the short version is, it's just something that people start posting on Twitter and reply, and it's just kind of like, we see you, we're looking at you, you're under the spotlight of the eye. Yeah. But people have been sending us photos, and look, who knows if it's a coincidence, if these people are listening to our podcast or what, but of like graffiti in different, from like Minneapolis or St. Louis, of people graffitiing the eye in different places. And it's like, that would be wild if it were really a reference. I mean, it's a powerful, like, just like this big unblinking eye staring at you. I mean, it's a pretty good symbol. And look, whether it becomes that or if it's the solidarity fist. But I think, Spencer, you're dead on. When you have a mass movement, but it lacks clear goals, demands, or leaders, it is very open to co-optation, which we've certainly seen happening in the recent protests. And that is absolutely a threat and a weakness and something to be aware of.
I mean, because we could talk about like co-op, like, you know, the something that we have in the show notes here, like one of the most iconic kind of, if you want to talk about like iconic looks in like American politics, like the Black Panther Party, they're I mean, they had the beret, they had the leather jackets, the turtlenecks. It was like a look that was like easy to put together. You know, you didn't have to have all the same pieces, but it was definitely something that was very enduring, and something that, you know, you read a lot, really helped with their movement. And a couple weeks ago, you saw at some of these protests a group that calls themselves the New Black Panther Party that, you know, dresses in the same way. They open carry in the same way that the original Black Panther Party did, but they're like out there like taking selfies with like the police, and like, you know, it's they're using this iconic image to portray themselves as something that they're not.
And so I'm curious what you guys saw, how you saw people responding to that when it came across your feed or whatever. Like, what did you see? I mean,
the first stuff I saw was like, you know, that picture of like them marching with the guns, and initially I saw a bunch of people like, damn, this is cool as hell. But then pretty shortly after, I don't know, I didn't see much of it on Instagram, but on Twitter, that's where I saw most of the photos. And pretty shortly, people were like, okay, something is up with this.
Yeah, it's you know, it's just like same thing with Spencer. Just like, there's a little iffy to me, you know.
Yeah, well, it sounds like, you know, you're following some savvy people, which is good, and obviously, you know, I am too. But I agree. I initially saw people fawning over these photos and reposting them, being like, oh, this is so great. This is exactly what we need right now. Thank you. And I think there's a lot that could be said about this. I think the positive thing we can take away from this is it speaks to the power of aesthetics and imagery and looking cool. And we should not underestimate that.
No, and I mean, yeah, I think that's it's a good way to put it. Not that everyone has to have a uniform, but everyone should try to look cool, because you know what? That's how you get people on your side. You look cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Again, I think it's like what I was saying earlier. I think we dismiss that at our own peril, because we are trying to communicate. When we are doing a march, when we are doing an action, we have a message, right? We're not out there just, you know, it's funny. This reminds me of kind of an argument I had with somebody I was dating a long time ago, who said something like, I had done a thing where I was like doing a direct action at an ICE facility and doing like a human chain where we blocked off the building, and it was a good thing, but it was like people risking arrest. And she said to me something like, well, that's your hobby and I have my hobby. And it really, it became kind of a conflict, because it was like, well, this isn't my hobby, you know. I don't go and march because I enjoy marching. It's because we care about these things, and we're trying to make a change in the society, and we're trying to convince people and change people's minds. So we have to remember that, right? That we're trying to reach people, and this is a form of communication. So if we can do that, if we can reach people more effectively by having a certain look that reaches out better, then that is certainly worth considering, and I think that's important to remember.
That subject of like looking cool, because you're kind of becoming this, as UMass followers, kind of a figure in the left cohort and everything. Is it subconscious to you that you think that maybe like, okay, it's kind of like a novelty of being a left guy wearing like a tie, and kind of like even though we talked about briefly like we don't believe that necessarily like the trad looks are inherent of the right, but do you think that plays a little bit part into how you approach your style? Like I'm doing this and I'm have these left-wing politics, and it's cool to be a little bit of a novelty in a sense.
Well, it's similar to how I feel being, or there's echoes of how I feel being in tech or in San Francisco, right? It's very easy to stand out in that environment just by the baseline being what it is. If you put on a tie, immediately you stand out, right? I mean, if I went to the world of finance in New York, I would also stand out, but for being casual, for having like a loud sport coat and not
patch pockets.
Yeah, exactly. Then they would be like, look at this guy with his patch pockets. But here, whether it's if I go to a DSA meeting or if I walk into a tech office, they're like, oh, who's this fancy lad with his tassel loafers,
fancy lad
with big swinging tassels over here. So certainly it's a way to get attention, and whether, and I guess I'm aware of that, and I try to use that, take advantage of that in a good way. I certainly am not trying to take up more space than I deserve or something, which can get, maybe somebody would upset people or something. I don't know. I mean, I'm just dressing how I like to dress, but
how you want.
Exactly. Yeah. But I'm certainly aware of the fact that it is going to stand out a little more because of the kind of standard set by my cohort and my environment. And if that makes me heard more than I would otherwise be, then great. I'll hopefully say something that needs to be heard by whoever's going to listen.
Yeah, I think, personally for me, I feel like it's kind of like the opposite, where it's, in terms of experience, where, I don't think I stand out much in like the menswear space. Again, like we talk about how I'm basically co-opting Ethan Newton or Drake's, but I think it's important that I share some of my political beliefs, because we talked about the lifestyle episode maybe very briefly, but you don't see that from other menswear guys. It's always, some people like to keep it private. That's on them. But I didn't feel comfortable, like maybe on like on June for like the Blackout Tuesday, some people didn't post anything or whatever, but I felt it was important to kind of talk about why this movement mattered to me, and why, like, even I was looking back in on my Facebook feed, I was talking about the Ferguson and all that stuff, Trayvon Martin and everything, and not to be like, look at me, look what I've done, but it's like, it's important to use the platform that you have, and hopefully, it is my hope that it kind of helps other menswear guys kind of come to that realization, like, if they are left, because again, like we said earlier, lots of guys in our group, at least, they're starting to get radicalized a little bit. They're starting to break out and think about things in a new way, and that's cool. And maybe we wouldn't have talked unless they had read the blog before or something like that.
And I think maybe this isn't super pertinent to the discussion, but I think the reason a lot of menswear guys don't really share politics, especially some of the more established guys. I mean, so like think about like Kraft at Home or whatever, like the series where hotel mogul Robert Kraft takes you through his like many mansions or whatever.
That guy. Yeah.
So there are a lot of menswear guys who are very well off, and I think their politics and lifestyle, for some menswear guys, might like horrify us if we learned them.
Yeah. I mean, I was going to say, I think it's interesting to talk about some of this stuff in the context of the, quote unquote menswear community, because when you put it in that context, some of these things that to me seem kind of tepid almost, or kind of milquetoast, will get these a lot of pushback, because I do think overall this community tends towards being white and wealthy, and therefore logically kind of reactionary. I mean, it all kind of makes sense and is unsurprising when you think about it. Well, and especially because we're saying menswear, but I think we all tend to have an interest in sort of vintage kind of stuff. And so, the connections, connections there are, look, you have to have a disposable income to get into this stuff. And the higher up you go towards bespoke, you have to have a lot of disposable income. And, wealthy people have wealthy people's politics, which means they're not going to be left. Or maybe they think, there are wealthy Democrats, but again, Democrats are not the left. Those are people who want to, maybe contribute to social causes and do like philanthropy. But again, this is kind of another topic, but philanthropy is kind of a scam, like a tax scam. But they want to maintain their wealth. That's the bottom line. These people are at the top of the hierarchy socially, and they want to stay there, which is kind of very coldly rational, right? Like, they do not want to change the structure of society because they might not be at the top anymore. And then again, of course, when it's mostly a lot of white people, of course I'm white. Of course, there are white people who are not racist or involved in like anti-racist work, but they have not experienced racism directly, anti-black racism. So when we're talking about like Black Lives Matter stuff, a lot of rich white people aren't getting it. And then when we're talking about vintage stuff, I think for all of us, it's like, well, we're into the aesthetics and it's pretty much ends there. But there is definitely a cohort of people who, for them, it's about this kind of false, like fictionalized nostalgia where they bring quote unquote vintage values into it. And they think like, oh, well, in the 50s, like they harken back for the social order of decades past, not just the clothing. Because they literally, again, think of themselves, especially people who now maybe are not at the top of the social hierarchy and feel put upon, they feel downtrodden because of that. But they think back decades ago, before the civil rights movement or before feminism or whatever, well, that's when they would have been in their rightful place at the top, So I think that's the kind of barely veiled sentiment there. It's like, well, before society got out of hand because we gave too much equality to homosexuals and blacks and women, that's when I'm putting words in the mouth of someone else here to be explicitly clear. That's when I would have had my rightful place at the top of the household and society, is sort of, I think, the sentiment of some of these people who have this real, like, vintage clothes, vintage values, vintage mindset kind of thing. Yeah. So, definitely. None of it's that surprising. And so we see that, and then, you just say, like, hey, Black Lives Matter, and people get extremely flustered by it when... and they want to like, it's like debate me, and it's like, shut the fuck up, man.
Well, I mean, that's kind of one reason why Spencer and I have stopped associating largely with the vintage community in Southern California. I don't know if we've talked about this before, but like the New York scene seems to be very like liberated. There's a lot of like queer culture into the vintage community over there, like burlesque, which is really great. But in California, maybe it's because it's a blue state, so like the real punk rock is to be conservative kind of thing.
Because I think the reason is that, I mean, I don't know for this for sure, but there's probably roots in like in queer culture to like the vintage scene in New York, where in California it mostly comes from the swing revival of the 90s. So people who got really big into like fucking cherry poppin' daddies in the 90s and then like never gave up on it. Like that's what the scene in California is built on.
But like you say, these people want to go back to the old order. I mean, it's very prominent in the whole vintage circles, whether it's thinly veiled or overtly veiled, but there's also like, it comes with new people getting into menswear, because it's kind of a similar mindset where, well, back then they wore suits, and that was when life was good. So if I wear a suit, I'm kind of like, getting into that. And I'm remembering this, we watched it on stream, but it was a Gentleman's Gazette video about his favorite movies from the 1970s to the 2000s or whatever. Decent video, good pics, whatever. But the comment section was pretty bad, and they really hated a lot of like the 70s films, and they said that like American culture died in 1964, which is when the Civil Rights Act was passed. Man. And it's literally like a guy literally put like R.I.P. America 1776 to 1964. Okay. And like that is just, it's insane to, that people are like that. But I guess I can see it if you're into this whole idea of like, dressing up. It comes from this kind of, I guess you want to call it like infantilized kind of thing of like, well, I'm going to be better than other people. Like it's about putting other people down instead of like an expression of personal style. And that's, again, if that's like, your case there, then of course your politics will align with putting others down, like capitalism.
At the same time, though, I think if we were to try to understand where that comes from, I would speculate that the kinds of people who feel that way are people who, again, in the present day, are not well off, right? They are not people who are being treated kindly by society, however you want to put it. I mean, I don't know, my mind is going to like Joker, but like when you have somebody who people want to find something to blame, right? And that is natural. Right. And there are, correct things to blame. The system of production called capitalism creates misery. It creates an underclass of, we have to have haves and have-nots. And if you're a have-not, things are bad. You can be homeless. You can go without health care. You can be, poor and miserable. But when somebody comes along and says, actually, this is because of feminists and minorities who are taking your jobs, this is probably not very surprising to a lot of people, but I don't know, maybe some of your listeners haven't thought of it this way before. So I think some of these people who are really drawn to this, or probably most of them, are not people who are really benefiting from the current social order and are looking for a place to blame, a way to place the blame that makes sense to them. So we can... Of course, one way to think about solving that, of course, is if we provided for everyone, that kind of takes the wind out of the sails of people like that, and it also takes away some of their power too by lifting up the other people who are oppressed. Like if I am a historically oppressed minority, and there are systems of society that are keeping me down, preventing me from getting housing or loans or whatever, and I eliminate those structural impediments, all of a sudden some asshole who doesn't like me, well, I can't pass a law to make him like me, but if I pass laws that make it so that now my barriers to housing and healthcare and education are gone, this other guy's personal animus is a lot less powerful. And so, this is kind of an argument for social democracy, if not socialism, communism. Right. But that's another way to kind of think about it and contextualize it.
Oh yeah, like there's so much anger and resentment from, like, again, going back to like the Proud Boys or whatever. Because I mean things aren't going well for anybody right now. Yeah. And if you grow up in a society where you're supposed to live a better life than your parents or whatever, right. You're supposed to inherit the world and all of this, you don't. People get people get angry, and you have to reach them before bad people do. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and that is exactly why I try and share stuff, just because I know, like, I was literally there. I'm sure I had some conservative views when I was, in high school or something like that. Like when I'm wearing a suit, like, well, I'm better than all those other people out there, and I gotta
I don't think
this whole thing.
think
even though I'm a Filipino, I would never have the same kind of power as the white people that I was trying to dress like or something.
Well, on that note,
I don't think I got any more reactionary than just thinking the clothes used to be better.
Yeah,
as I don't think I ever was like, oh man, if only it was really back then.
Yeah, but Ethan, just briefly, I do think what you just said kind of made me think of this, that there is something too about and I guess for me it's not that significant because anybody who sees me, I'm white, but like there's an element for some of us of reclamation, I think, of this kind of style, right? So I'm Jewish, and my grandfather wouldn't have been allowed into the country club where the WASPs would have dressed the way that now I think it's cool to dress.
Right.
So a little bit, I mean, obviously, again, for somebody who is a visible minority, who is Filipino or black or something, I think that is a much stronger type of reclamation. But I do think it's kind of fun to think of it that way, because certainly, my great grandparents immigrated here, but definitely I know that my dad, I'm lucky I grew up in a town with a lot of Jews, so I never really faced anti-Semitism, and without getting into a whole spiel about what it's like to be a Jew in America, I've always been super privileged and never really faced that. Some people do, but not really. Jews are pretty well off in general these days in America, like white Jews. But yeah, that was a thing. When my dad was a kid, he had people that were like anti-Semitic. And so, yeah, that's kind of a fun thing for me to think about. And I have heard that similar sentiment from other people who are racial minorities in the menswear world, that it is kind of a reclaiming that kind of thing, as well as the fact that, as we've talked about before, these styles were never wholly owned by white Christian conservatives. You can also go back and find plenty of photos of non-white people looking extremely cool in mid-20th century, which are great inspiration. So again, this is like, we don't have to allow people who are our ideological enemies to own these things, that we have just as much right to as they do.
Yeah. I think that's also, again, one reason why I stay in the vintage community is as far as I could, just because other than just being kind of lonely, there's not a lot of young people in it anyway. But, there is that kind of thing of, you make a friend and whatever, and you kind showing them, hey, you can have these politics and dress like, dress like it was the 30s or whatever. Yeah. And the subject of like, POCs and looking sharp. We shared a picture on the Instagram of Tyrus Wong, who was a Disney animator, looking super cool, wearing a spear point collar, runaway collar over like a sport coat. And then there's also like the Macintosh suit, which again, I'm not entirely sure because this comes from like an anecdote from another menswear enthusiast who is kind of like a self-proclaimed historian. But he, back in the 30s LA, the Macintosh clothiers, there's a lot of Filipinos in LA, and in the 30s they had like a special model of suit that Macintosh made for them that, to me, it looks like a regular 30s suit. Maybe it was just like a localized thing that they did, but it's like, it was, very 30s, like pagoda-ish shoulders, but short in the jacket because, swing dancing and just like that kind of silhouette, and then long kind of wide leg but flared trouser. And it's like, there's a couple of pictures that I'm going to put in the show notes of Filipinos wearing that type of suit. And it's kind of cool. Like, for me, it's like, wow, like, I'm sure at some point when I was a kid, I was like, oh, I'm trying to dress, quote, white in a sense, right? But then no, it's like I'm trying to dress just like as a Filipino would back in those days. Might be, just because suits were a big thing, and we talked about on the stream about if our suits a symbol of like Western superiority. We kind of talked a little bit about that the last time or the previous recording of this. But I think it's like reclaiming it, and it's just an expression of personal style, because like no one has to dress like this. We live in an age now where you can pick your aesthetics, and they can be independent of your politics or what you view as right in the world, because there are good people who wear suits and there are bad people who wear suits.
Yeah, that's very true. Like, that's one of the defining features of the modern, well, quote unquote postmodern era that we're living in, right? That there is no more monoculture. Everything is accessible all the time. And so that kind of applies to music, it applies to art, it applies to style. I've had people sometimes make comments to me, which I get what they're saying, but I also find it kind of weird. They're like, oh, you're dressing like that in San Francisco or something? And I'm like, yeah, because I can. Well, because I can go on the internet and see, I don't know, because they're like, oh, well, you're dressed up like you're in Italy or like you're something. And it's like, yeah, well, that's the cool thing, is that I can do that. And
listen, so can you.
Yeah, I don't know. I think that's very normal. And again, that is one of the features of the present moment, is that we can combine everything at once. I can kind of combine. And personally, I mean, my approach to it is I certainly don't try to dress head to toe imagining that like I am in the 1960s or I am in Italy right now. But I do like to incorporate those things. And I think you guys do similar, because I like to imagine it's like a little, like you're a jazz guy and you do a little lick quoting from another tune.
Yeah.
It's an illusion. It's a reference. It's a being in a dialogue. And I think it's
reference is a great way to put it.
Yeah. And I think it's such a cool feature of this moment in time, that you can be constantly all at the same time referencing everything at once, or multiple different things from different periods. And we're not stuck in one time and place, and that's fun, and it's liberating. And I think to kind of push back against that, I mean, the far end of that, and again, I've gotten these comments too, are like, oh, I mean, the most classic is like, what are you wearing boat shoes for? Are you going on a boat? And then, of course, you can kind of take that to the extreme. It's like, well, what are you wearing? You're wearing chinos? Like, are you in the military? Like, oh, you're wearing jeans? Like, are you riveting? Or like, I think, of course, all of these things have been decontextualized from their original uses. I mean, most clothing is not fully, purpose is not just functional. It might have some function, but a lot of these things originally were very functional and now are fashionable as well as partly functional. And I think it's weird to take this purely instrumental, purely functional point of view towards clothes when you can take this much more freeing, kind of liberating view where anything goes. So yeah.
Great song.
Yeah, Cole Porter.
Indiana Jones Temple of Doom.
Yes, that
too. Yeah.
What were you gonna say, Ethan?
Well, I was just gonna say, I get a couple of people who come in the DMs like that, just like Yung Chomsky said, or YC as we call him. I think that might be the first time we said it this whole stream. Stream? What? On Twitch? This is a podcast. But okay. I think occasionally I do get a couple of people in there who wonder about those kind of things, about the context of stuff, whether it's the political, whether they do say, hey, that's kind of like a preppy thing, that preppy people, WASP people are racist and right wing. Is it okay if I wear it? To just, you're wearing loafers, you're not wearing slippers in the house, kind of thing, So I think it's really cool to kind of blend all those together. And I think that all of us here, whether it's in the group, or just on our own, kind of further that narrative that it's okay to kind of take it out of those original contexts and make it freeing and postmodern or punk rock.
Yeah, and this is a bit of a tangent too, but this brings a thought to mind that I wanted to talk about last time we didn't get to, but I think about sometimes.
Round two, baby.
So it's the idea that your style and your clothing says something about you, which I think is true. I don't disagree with it, but I think there's a lot of nuance to that idea, right? Because I don't know. I think there's some extremes of that. Like on the one extreme of that concept would be, I guess, going back to my hypothetical of like, I'm a Facebook engineer and I work at Facebook and I'm wearing a T-shirt that says Facebook on it. So that is a really explicit form of my clothing saying something about me. Like my shirt is literally telling you with words and logos, I work at Facebook, and then we can start to imagine kind of different degrees of recontextualization, decontextualization, and separation from that. Like imagine if I were wearing that shirt and I didn't work at Facebook and somehow that were really obvious. Like I had a whole, like a sport coat and a whole menswear fit with the the Facebook. I don't know. That sounds like it would look goofy, but maybe there's a cool way to do that. Or, the person who gets the T-shirt from a thrift store that says like, I survived, Jason's bar mitzvah or something, and you're wearing that. We all know the ironic thrifted graphic tee. Right. So then it's like your shirt is literally saying something, but it's kind of obvious that it's not literal. Or then you get fully abstracted where it's just patterns and silhouettes. And then what does your clothing say? Well, it might be saying the one person who takes it, again, very narrowly and says, oh, Steve Bannon, you're trying to look like Steve Bannon. Or, again, more broadly, well, you're referring to this kind of 80s preppy style, which means what? What does it mean? Well, if I know that you are not actually the kind of person who would have been a preppy, that kind of adds a layer to it. Or maybe overall, maybe it just means... overall, I think what I kind of got to in my own internal debate is what I want to be saying about myself with my clothes is that I am someone who cares about my presentation and that I put thought into the silhouette and the colors and the patterns and the shapes. And that is bottom line what I want to communicate. And I do not want to be the person who is like trying to give you this very direct, you should not be looking at me and thinking this guy's trying to dress like this person or trying to do this. But if it's making you think, oh, that kind of reminds me of this, but it's also a little bit like this, or what does that mean? Because, he's playing off of multiple different things. I think that's where it gets fun and interesting. But there are pitfalls where we can get too literal about it. And I think that's where your clothes saying something can get, I don't know, in my view, can kind of go astray. But yeah, I'm curious what you guys think about that idea of your clothes kind of saying something.
I mean, I guess I know Spencer was going to say something, so I just took it from him. But, no, I very much agree with you because if you guys follow my Instagram, I like to show a lot of my interests, whether it's my very big critical look at film scores to Star Wars and whatever. And it's very important for me to present myself as a very multifaceted person that kind of doesn't fall into any general nerd category or a menswear category. And it is my hope that people look at it and be like, oh, okay, you can be multifaceted. Your life can be different than what people expect it to be. And it's cool to have a bunch of different interests and have them overlap.
Exactly.
In my Twitch stream, I always liken it to, I've always had this kind of referential personality where, whether it's in film scores, I like in the stuff that I write for my friends, I reference a lot of my favorite pieces. It's one reason why I love Star Wars or James Bond, where they reference each other, and why menswear seemed like a very, a fitting hobby for me, where I'm able to, eventually now, as I've come into my own style, take everything I love from the 30s, whether it's the spear point collar or the foulard ties that are unlined, to the ivy sack jackets, to the wide leg, dungaree jeans, right? It's all about doing all that kind of stuff. And I think, it is a postmodern kind of approach to your personality, what you're trying to say about yourself. And if I'm a postmodern Marxist, which we all know doesn't really exist, but that then so be it, right? That's kind of that's my point. Pushing that subversive narrative, you can do it, and I think that's super important to me.
I really I think something that is very cool about menswear is, as Ethan said, there is just so much that you can pull from historically.
Yep.
And I mean, it's it's there's that meme of the two people looking at the lists or whatever, and one person I think it started out with just colors, so one person sees just red, blue, yellow, or whatever, but then it's no, this is maroon, this is burgundy, this is sunflower or whatever. It's that's we look at things as oh, this is this is Italian style, this is American ivy, this is whatever,
right?
But then other people look at it and just see suit, yes, or whatever. But no, I mean, I think you're I like the approach that you have to it. I don't know how much I've personally thought about it before now, but in general, that's how I think I look at it.
And to tie it back into thinking about aesthetics on the left, right? I think if we are thinking of, why might we find the, super generalized style of left fashion to be kind of lacking. Well, one of the things behind that, right, is that leftism, whether we're talking about socialism, communism, social democracy, anybody who's part of the labor movement, these kind of things, this is like a subcultural, or at this point in time, and this is not a compliment, right? It's become a subcultural movement in the United States, which is bad because that's a weak position as a result of the dismantling of the labor movement and the lack of institutional power. So we don't want, if we want to win, we don't want to be a subculture. But unfortunately, the left has kind of retreated into subculture. And part of subculture is having signifiers that show to other people that you're part of that subculture. And that's when you can kind of get into this stuff where, again, you're being very explicit in your appearance to say, like, let people know that you're communicating very directly, right? With I am dressing in all black and I'm wearing buttons and patches that with a circle A on it, or again, this is really cliche, right? But if I cover myself in buttons that show my organizations, you can look at me and know exactly where I stand on things. And that's obviously desirable, right? If I am someone who's part of something that's pretty niche and I want to communicate that because I want to meet other people, and I have walked around wearing buttons for DSA, and it has led to good conversations where people are like, oh, tell me about that. And then I've told them about it and brought them into meetings and they've become a member. So that's good. But, you can take that to the point where you're covering yourself head to toe in it, and it's like your whole outfit. So I think if we're talking about fashion, I of course like to keep it subtle. I think if anybody's looking at my fits, you'll often notice when I wear a sport coat, I have a DSA pin that I will wear as my lapel pin. It's the DSA logo. I feel like that is, I don't know if that's like led to any great conversations, but that's my way of nodding to it and being subtle. I mean, I also have full-on bread and roses tattoos on my forearms, but those are often covered. But yeah, that idea of subcultural signifiers and trying to communicate and signal with your clothing very explicitly that you are part of that kind of a thing. I see that as, I understand where it comes from, but I think it is not, you kind of wall yourself off from a position of strength that way. And where I would tend to want to see us go, and for all the baggage that this has, is we want to show that, look, these ideas are actually very quote unquote normie. You can look and dress, and not that people who are weird or outsiders are unwelcome, but this stuff is for everyone, is the point. This is for this is for black people, white people, people of all races, people of all levels of ability. This is inclusive, but inclusive means it includes. I mean, we got to be realistic sometimes, I guess, about demographics, meaning that like most people are, like what is the majority of people in this country? What are they like? What are they interested in? What do they know about? And when we start getting really kind of academic and obscure in our language and our signifiers, it goes over people's heads. So we gotta be like, you can just be a regular dude wearing workwear or wearing a suit or whatever, and also be a communist.
Well, because I mean, people like talking about like left-wing academics or whatever, but it's like every left movement that has actually succeeded in history was built on like farmers or workers, whatever. You need to be able to appeal to just the average person.
Yeah, and it's easy to get yourself into, I don't know, to kind of step in it when you're talking about like the average person, because again, we want to include everybody, but and like the average person, quote unquote, is not something that exists, but so it's tough to be both broad and inclusive, I guess, is kind of what I've been trying to get at a couple times, but I don't know, just the road is hard. that is a challenge.
Yeah. So, speaking of the road is hard, something that we can touch on before we're close to finish off is the idea that there's no ethical consumption under capitalism.
Yeah, I was gonna say we've been talking about everything from the consumer side, but I mean if we do posture as like as left leaning, like whatever. You gotta talk about labor. I'm sorry, guys. I got like fucking like 3 hours of sleep last night. It's another one of those shorts episodes for me.
Which you don't know if this is coming before or after. It is up to you, because we did record an episode just in case this one didn't come out in time. So, fun little reference for you.
So if you heard an episode about shorts, then you already know it. If you haven't heard it, guess what? You got a surprise coming.
You have no idea. Yeah. But yeah, so how do you reconcile being on the left and and consuming and everything, being cognizant over
because I mean
issues in supply chain and labor.
Like if we want to talk about the fashion industry, it is a massively exploitative
you have to do
it has like its carbon footprint is just like enormous.
What size is that? 13?
13. No, but as I brought up in the first time we recorded, that day I had just seen like some infographic or whatever on Instagram. I didn't verify the truth to it, but some infographic that said that the fashion industry's carbon footprint is larger than the airline industry.
That's crazy.
That really puts it into perspective.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad we're talking about this. So first of all, I don't think there are easy answers here. But I do think that it is, when we are talking about, I think this is a good thing for us to focus on as people who are interested in menswear and who care about the world and society. I think that I sometimes see well-meaning people in this kind of community get a little bit bogged down in these kind of more superficial questions that are more to do with kind of branding and PR, and I find that stuff to be a distraction. And maybe I'll come back and talk about that a little bit more. But these are material issues, right? Meaning they affect people's lives, livelihoods. They have real impact. So we're talking about, like Spencer said, the environmental impact of the fashion industry. We're talking about the labor conditions of the people that are making the things that we want to buy. And like the distribution of wealth in society, and how that is kind of playing out through the people who own these businesses and the people who work for them, and whether they are able to organize and bargain. So unfortunately, it's really hard. I think the frustrating and true and unsatisfying answer is that we can't consciously consume our way to a better world. Now, I don't want to say that as an abdication of all responsibility, which, to get back to the kind of slogan that Spencer quoted, which is that there's no ethical consumption under capitalism. That's something that people often say, and I think it can sometimes be used in this kind of nihilistic way, which is to say that, well, everything that's made under capitalism is unethical, therefore it doesn't matter what choices I make. I don't think that's true. Some things are worse than others, and we should try to make the choices that are less bad. That being said, I think it is valuable to remember what the real goals are, which for me is the dismantling of this system of capitalism, because as this slogan is intended to highlight, it is inherently exploitative. And we can never just kind of buy from the right brands and therefore create an egalitarian society. And so there's a lot of things that make me think about this. One, I've seen a bunch just pop up in the news even since the last time we recorded. One that I was kind of highlighting earlier today, I posted it in the chat, and I don't know if this seems kind of spicy or whatever, but bear with me for a minute, because this has been on my mind for a little while. But so I guess it was. The larger point is that, again, conscious consumerism is not a bad thing, but it is ultimately kind of a dead end. And we have to be somewhat cynical, or maybe very cynical, about brands and their public relations statements. So I guess the day that we're recording this today is supposed to be, there's some kind of call that's been put out. I've seen over social media. I don't really know what the origin of this was, but to not spend any money as a part of the Black Lives Matter movement, to do like a generalized boycott today. And so
like economic blackout or whatever.
So I guess I'm not sure exactly what the parameters were. Like, I bought lunch today. Hopefully that's okay. But I haven't copped any Johns today, so I think I'm still good. But I saw Vans, the sneaker company, put a statement. It's like a hero, like the first thing you see when you go to their site, and it says, like, a new pair of Vans can wait. And it's like, support some Black-owned businesses instead. And then, of course, you can still scroll down and buy Vans
and buy a pair.
But this is Vans trying to look woke, and I saw that, and I kind of rolled my eyes. And again, bear with me, because I think some people see this and they're like, "That's good. They are supporting a good cause." But I think what we need to ask ourselves is like, but what are they actually doing? How does this help anyone? For Vans to do this? And so, of course, then I'm like, all right, well, what has this company actually done when it comes to really helping people, or when their bottom line has been in question? So a few minutes of searching later, I found that when the Rana factory plaza collapsed in Bangladesh a few years ago, in which 1,100 people were killed,
Jesus.
Yeah, in the aftermath of that, there was a proposal put forth by labor unions to come up with this new safety agreement, and they tried to. Their strategy was to get H&M on board, and then hope that everyone else would follow after that. And there was this big public pressure campaign, and H&M got on board. H&M being based, I think, in Sweden. They're European anyway. But then what happened is all the American companies, including the company that owns Vans, decided not to sign on to this agreement because it would have been legally binding. And so they proposed this alternative where they wanted it not to be legally binding, and they wanted to put the responsibility on the individual factory owners. So they were like, yeah, actually, we have this alternative that's really not going to put any responsibility on us. So I think that's kind of a pretty powerful contrast, right? Like, they'll put a thing on their website that's like, support Black-owned businesses. Of course, they're not going to prevent you from buying Vans today, but they're going to do it because, look, Black Lives Matter is broadly popular right now, especially, I would think, among the sort of people who are likely to buy Vans. So that is probably going to be a PR win for them. But then when it comes to literally protecting the safety and lives of the factory workers who are making their shoes in Bangladesh, which is not a big thing in the news that people are like marching for, they're like, not really, if it's gonna hurt our profits. So, and then again, to just push on this a little bit more, I've seen this kind of call over the past couple of weeks, and I think I'm less cynical about it when it's coming from individual people. But the idea that, like, support minority-owned businesses, they're saying that, and I think people's hearts are in the right place. But I think, again, it's not like it's bad to support minority-owned businesses. Go ahead and do that. But I think that we, again, need to be kind of conscious of, like, what is that doing? Because it's kind of, it sort of says, and you might think this is really, I'm being too cynical about it, but it's like, So Black Lives Matter is happening, and you're saying, well, buy from black-owned businesses. So it kind of is saying, well, black people deserve redistribution of wealth only if they are business owners. You know, like most people are not business owners, right? So it's not bad to support those businesses. That's fine. But my goal is to make society more equitable for everybody. And we do that through changing the system of production. We do that through changing laws. We do that through ultimately, deposing the ruling class, not just by diversifying the ruling class, which I would say is kind of the major difference between what we might call liberalism and then quote unquote leftism, like socialism or communism. Mm-hmm. If we just made all the billionaires in the world diverse, like a bunch of them women and a bunch of them black and brown, what have you, some people would be like, yes, that's so good, it's diversity. But no, that's not actually solving the problem, because they then still have all this power over the rest of us, the working class. And I think a lot of people probably have had the experience of having a boss who is not a white man, but is also still exploitative or shitty or abusive because they have power over you. And that is just the nature of that relationship. So I think, again, we have to be kind of skeptical of those kind of calls and remember that the focus has got to be on changing the nature of power and exploitation and not just kind of increasing the representation at the top of this hierarchy, but really dismantling that hierarchy.
Oh, no, absolutely, yeah.
I mean, I guess it's my hope that, it's more of like a first step thing in terms of being aware of the injustices and the inequalities, instead of if we just do this, it'll be okay kind of thing. I mean, maybe I'm not as cynical as you are just yet, And in terms of like the whole, performative woke brand thing, of course I roll my eyes whenever it comes from a, like a fast fashion or something that, it's a mass market kind of thing. But when I see it in our menswear space, maybe it's rose-colored glasses because, again, I don't know the politics of everyone who works in it, even though I might be in, at least they're like colleagues of mine, if you want to call it that. Even though I might not have talked to some of these people officially. But, it's I feel like it's a little bit nicer just because, you see it. Maybe that is, personally induced, right? Seeing if the Armory did it. I know that Mark Cho talked about redlining and everything. So I had never seen it before, but it's cool to see him kind of, use the opportunity at least to talk about it. But yeah, so
I mean, yeah, this does get to an interesting point, which is like, how much better is it to buy from a brand like Drake's or something like that, where maybe it's like, you don't, most people don't know like who the CEO of H&M or Banana Republic is. But if you are into menswear and you know Drake's or Bryceland's or the Armory, you probably know like the corporate hierarchy. Like that's exactly. I think what Ethan is maybe getting at is it just feels different when it's coming from a brand where you either know the person who runs it or just know of them, like have an idea in your head of them. With these
but so even with those brands, I think that makes a lot of sense. But what we still don't know, and we kind of got into this in our conversation before, like, so I can get a sport coat from Spear and Mackay for some $300. Now, in many ways, similar sport coat from Drake's might be around $1,000. And so how, as a consumer, what do I attribute that difference in price to? I would find it very illuminating if I had some more information. I mean, a lot of these brands, these quote-unquote heritage brands, do kind of highlight in their marketing, like, oh, yeah, this is our factory, and it's in this place in England. I mean, they certainly do talk about it's made in England or made in Italy, and I guess that's supposed to in some way justify the price versus Spear and Mackay is manufactured in China. I mean, point being, I really just don't know, because I've heard just kind of from people online, the Chinese factories vary a lot in terms of the conditions. Some of them are bad, some of them are good, and the same thing for European factories. Some of them actually have really terrible conditions, and that.
No, I mean, yeah, I want to make it clear that I wasn't saying that it's like, oh yeah, it's like just buy from the expensive brands and then you're absolved of all sin. I will say, I mean, I don't know how much. I mean, Ethan knows where their suits come from allegedly.
You can look on Style Forum.
But I will say it's like if you want to talk about like the margins that Drakes are working with, their rugby shirts for a while were made by Columbia Knit. If you go to the Columbia Knit website, you can buy them for $70. Drake's was selling them for what, like $250?
The
like
rugby shirt that I was talking about earlier is a Columbia Knit that I was wearing.
Yeah, so it's like even these big brands that not big brands, these quote unquote friendlier brands, like with the human face, they are still just after the bottom line. That's what they're there for.
Yeah. Because they're going to be inherently, for that, whether they are invested personally into it or they have.
And Ethan, I want to say, I think your point is well made that like if by posting on social media and talking about like, support minority-owned businesses or whatever, if by doing that we can call attention to wealth inequality and educate people, I think it's valuable. But I think, I just again want to push back a little bit on the idea that should be the end, or that I think it might sometimes divert energy. Again, I don't want to sound too skeptical, but I am skeptical of this whole notion of conscious consumerism. And the other thing too, I want to kind of call out is, and I know Ethan, you have kind of worked in social media, so I don't want to suggest that I am trying to say like this is some kind of manipulative or like conspiracy thing on behalf of brands, because I get that a lot of times these initiatives of saying when a brand posts like we support Black Lives Matter or some social cause, that is coming from people who work there who genuinely support those causes and have those politics. Right. Having said that, I think we do need to remember though the filters in place of what gets approved, right? So if I am some 20-something working in social media for a brand and I say I want to do this post saying Black Lives Matter, that of course is not going to ever go out unless the owner says okay, like they have the final approval on it, right? And the owner's not going to say okay if they don't think that the audience, the consumers, if this is going to go over well with them. And now, so you can make that post, again, if you work for Vans, somebody at Vans came up with that. And it's not that I think that all the people at Vans don't believe in Black Lives Matter, but they think that this is going to be popular and beneficial to them to post. If they didn't, they wouldn't post it. But then if somebody at Vans, or, let's talk about another brand that has a reputation or built their reputation on being quote unquote ethical and transparent. Everlane. Okay, similar thing. We've talked about this before. Everlane was in the news not too long ago for union busting because their customer service representatives decided they wanted to collectively be able to bargain for better conditions. And Everlane, whose whole thing was about being ethical and transparent. Yeah, they were like, no, thank you. You cannot actually form a union. We are going to fire you all. So that's what happens. If it were some plucky young person at Everlane saying, I think we should put up a statement supporting this broadly popular movement for social justice, they'd be like, yes, absolutely, let's post that. And it's not that it's bad or wrong or that the person didn't really believe that, but it's being filtered by the owner who is owns capital, and then even beyond that, they're being disciplined by the market, where it's up to, they have investors, they have shareholders, and they have consumers. So I think we should be wary of imputing too much. Brands are not your friends, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
No.
Like,
yeah.
I'm just like American, like, the way that brands try to come off as woke, it always it's like, I'm going to paraphrase like a drill tweet, which is a very fun and popular thing to do. But it's like turning a big dial that says social progress and looking back at the audience for approval. Yeah. Like that's what they're doing.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what as we finish off, like what can we do? I mean, I think it's I don't want to say like, oh, see, classic menswear is the best way to do it. I do think personally, buying vintage or pre-owned clothing is a good way to kind of go around that. We didn't get too much about buying like milsurp or whatever this time around, but there's a whole episode on that anyway. But there's that essence of not only like kind of recapturing the context and turning it into something new, but also like you're not openly contributing to all the labor stuff and all the supply chain stuff
at some point in the supply chain there is going to be some awful things happen.
Yeah, exactly. So I guess, do you guys think it's just lesser of two evils kind of thing, or that this is the best that we should do the best that we can?
I mean,
as much as our knowledge is.
I think in general, I mean, it's like I agree with YC. It's like there are always, like, every option there's going to be some bad. You should do your best to support the least bad businesses you can. But I mean, it's going back to the whole thing where it's like, we say it's like, okay, well, it's less exploitative if you buy from a heritage brand or if you buy from a small artisanal brand or whatever. But like, the reason everyone shops at H&M is not because they make better clothes. It's because people can afford to shop at H&M.
Right.
And they can't afford to shop at the Armory or whatever.
And that's, again, something that we would do well to remember especially when we're trying to talk to people on the left. I think this is a common and understandable reaction. It's like, okay, well, you're telling me that it's good to dress better and to look cool, and then you're talking about brands where everything's extremely expensive, and it's like, fuck you, I'm never going to listen to you again. This is absurd.
And I mean, to be clear, this would be an insane discussion to have with just like someone at a protest. Right. It's like, hey, where'd you get those clothes? Have you heard of Drake's?
Yeah. But if you, I got some shit from Drake's at 60% off from Nordstrom, although 60% off Drake's is still a lot of people would think like too expensive. Like if you're used to shopping at, H&M. But yeah, I think buying secondhand stuff and buying vintage stuff is, if we're talking about the kind of like ethics of it, is really the only way to, I mean, I guess somebody who works in garment manufacturing would kind of push back on that. They'd be like, well, I'm not going to have a job if nobody ever buys new clothes anymore. So we can that's kind of a wrinkle on it. But yeah, look, the only way to be, have somewhat clean hands on that, so to speak, is to buy things that are already in circulation. And I do certainly try to do that. But this brings us back to the whole no ethical consumption. Like, the only way to be completely guilt-free is to go live in the woods and never buy anything ever. So I don't know. I don't think we should throw up our hands and not think about this stuff. I think we should continue to think about it. But I think the other thing is we don't solve these problems, again, by making all the right choices in what we buy. We solve them by getting organized, building a left movement, and changing society. So yeah, I think it's good to buy vintage. It's good to learn as much as you can about the people that you're buying from, and sometimes understand that buying something more expensive does mean that it's better made and more durable, and that can be good because you're not going to have to replace it. But it doesn't always mean that. Buying the more expensive thing sometimes just means it's more expensive. So that also can be really hard to know, because obviously brands are not telling you like, hey, we're selling this at 600% of what it costs to make, or like this cost to make. The person who made this and who sewed it got paid exactly the same as the person who sewed this other thing that's 1/5 the price. It would be cool if we could know that stuff, and always am interested in hearing from people who have a little more inside knowledge in the manufacturing process. But yeah, I think that it's good to know about that stuff. Support labor movements, support workers movements in any way possible, monetarily, support them with your time, and buy vintage, but ultimately educate yourself and join a local organization in your community. I think that is the best action item. If this stuff resonates with you, it's really hard to make an impact with something on the national level or on the other side of the world. And it's great to donate money, and it's great to sign petitions. Although, I don't know, I'm pretty cynical about the value of signing petitions, to be honest. But going and showing up and meeting people in real life and being part of an organization that can mobilize. I've mentioned this a few times, but I am a member of the DSA, the Democratic Socialists of America, that I've been part of for over 3 years in San Francisco, and we've done a lot of work that I'm really proud of, some of it electoral in terms of ballot measures and getting one of our members elected to the Board of Supervisors in the city and protections for renters, and then some of it more like direct actions and protests and education and passing out supplies to our homeless neighbors, all that kind of stuff. So that is my recommendation, but if another organization is in your city that resonates with you more, then go for it. But I think it's important to kind of get out of your house, if of course, if you're able, when you're able, given the whole pandemic situation. But be in the community, because that's where you can make an impact, and you can meet people and learn from people and be a part of something.
Well, I feel like that's a great closing sentiment there.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's like, I spent in right after the election in 2016, which, I don't know, like 2015, 2016 was like my political awakening, I guess.
It was for a lot of people.
In the eve of the, after Trump was elected, I was like, okay, I don't want to just sit here and feel hopeless or whatever, helpless. So I went out, I found there was a local branch of Socialist Party USA in Orange County. Fell apart after a couple months because there were like 4 members and 2 of them stopped showing up. But I mean, it's like, no, this year I worked with Students for Bernie on my campus. That was hugely rewarding. I'm talking to someone I know in the local branch of DSA, which is a lot more active than the SPUSA branch that we had. But like if you can, I know that one of the like in politics, it has been super helpful for me to actually be a part of something and do something instead of just sitting there and like reading about everything going on.
Right.
Because like it's no good doing that. It's no good just sitting there and worrying about politics and just like reading every article you come across. You're gonna feel like shit.
Exactly. And as always, also share what you believe in and talk to other people, radicalize people, because your friends, right? I mean, that's kind of like a big thing too. Start with who you know and everything. And I'm very glad that a lot of us, I learned a lot from talking to Spencer, a lot from talking to YC and everything, and you disseminated that through to other people. So.
And I will. I'll conclude with my slogan, which I'm always saying, which I didn't get a chance to insert until now, which is "Dress trad, be rad." That's the Yung Chomsky.
That's the absolute perfect thing. So so for people, if they want to find you, so they want to keep up with with your synth stuff, with your fits, where
the best way to find me is on Twitter at Yung Chomsky. It's YUNGCHOMSKY, and you can listen to TrueAnon podcast. It's at TrueAnon Pod on Twitter, and then you can find TrueAnon. It's like a play on QAnon, but true instead of Q. You can find it wherever podcasts are available, and so we are almost a year in. We're at like 80 some episodes, so. Yeah,
we've been doing it for 3 years, and we're on episode like 45.
All right, well, slow and steady wins the race.
Slow and steady. I mean, guys, check out TrueAnon. Spencer and I were able to, I guess, meet YC for the first time at a live show that he did when he was here.
That was January, right?
January.
When that kind of thing was still legal and safe.
Yeah. Well, in the future, if you're finding this in the tape. Somewhere in the future, and they're doing live shows, make sure you guys go check it out, because it was a lot of fun and my first real exposure to all the Epstein business, at least on that level of it. So Yeah. Well, guys, thank you for listening. Again, you can follow us at Style and Direction, all spelled out. You can find it at patreon.com/Style and Direction if you want to contribute and get a cool bonus episode. We get bonus episodes every month. Again, not sure when this one's coming out, but so check your Patreon feeds and the Discord channel for that, because you get access to our exclusive Discord where we all are on, and it's a lot of great stuff in there. I am at Ethan M. Wong.
I am Spencer DSO.
And we will see you guys in the next one.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. You can say bye-bye too.
Bye-bye.
If you want to. There we go.
Hey everyone, this is Spencer from the beginning of the episode. I'm just here to give a very special shout out to our Sidecast fanatics. That's right, the people who are part of our highest tier possible on Patreon for $10 a month. So big thanks, big ups, whatever you want to call it, to Seth Peterson, Austin Matlott, Eric Hall, and Shane Curry. So if you'd like to get your name read at the end of the episode by me or Ethan, either one I guess, or maybe MJ or Matt, hey, you're giving us $10 a month. You know, you could get whoever you want to say your name. Anyway, go check us out on Patreon, Style and Direction. That's the name of the podcast. Our Patreon is patreon.com/Style and Direction. And sign up there. But anyway, that was the episode. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye. Solo bye-bye for you.